When I was in Calgary, I didn't just hunt hippies. I actually did talk to some conservatives, too. Here's my interview with Jason Kenney, cabinet minister. Jason Kenney, there's a lot of policy discussions I want to get into, but first I want to talk about the cloud that is over this convention. I mean, all of the media attention is being sucked up by the quarrel between Stephen Harper, who's personally been engaged in a fight with three senators. What do you have to say about that?
I have to say that if people broke the rules, they should be held accountable for it. There's a motion in the Senate to deal with that. If they broke criminal rules, there's a separate criminal track to deal with that. But you know, we're a G8 country with the most successful economic record in the developed world. And I think we have to put that in perspective. Yes, it's an issue we have to deal with, but we got hard-working delegates from all across the country debating important resolutions about the future of Canada, and maybe just a little teensy bit of that should get some coverage.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny you say that because 2 days ago, Justin Trudeau was in town, and he gave a speech at the Petroleum Club, and he said 3 times that he wants to, quote, put a price on carbon pollution. That's the new way of saying a carbon tax, and I haven't seen a drop of coverage of that in the Globe and Mail, the CBC, or the Toronto Star. Has that resonated at all with this convention? Is that even on your radar screen?
Well, there's going to be no resolution here endorsing a carbon tax. I can tell you that much. We ran and won each of the last 2 elections opposing the Liberal idea of imposing a carbon tax, which would be a crippling tax on everything. It would drive up the cost of energy, of groceries, of everything that people buy, of their electricity. And, you know, that's what Justin Trudeau's come out for. Yet again, 3 times unlucky for the Liberal Party proposing a carbon tax. And by the way, what is this notion that carbon is pollution? I thought it was a natural part of our environment. It's not a toxin. That's just propaganda, which I suspect is coming from some pretty fringy elements in his party.
Well, he's the leader. He's the one who's saying it. Here's my point. I mean, I'm conservative in my blood. I'm not a member of the party, but I'm obviously a supporter of the movement, and I feel that the movement has been sidetracked. Now, it's the media that is focused like a laser on the quarrel in the Senate, but I like to say to conservatives, if you don't choose your controversies, the media will choose one for you. That is, if you're not getting into the fights of your choosing, media will choose a fight that the Liberals present, that the NDP will present, or they'll pick a fight. Are there any fights that the Conservative government or this Conservative convention wants to choose on their ground?
Well, you know, we have been pushing really difficult reforms in so many areas, Ezra. For example, just yesterday, John Baird gave the John Diefenbaker Award for Human Rights to Cardinal Zen and called out the abuse of the rights of Tibetans, of Uyghur Muslims, of Falun Gong practitioners, of persecuted Christians in China. Now, how many G8 foreign ministers, how many major foreign ministers will stand up on a stage and call out the abuses of human rights of religious minorities in China? Did that get any coverage?
Well, I agree with you that needs more coverage, but that's a symbolic statement. What about a big fight? I mean, there were big fights in the government in the early terms, reducing the GST. It's just a big fiscal one, reducing income taxes. Where are the fights of this term?
Look, I wouldn't...
They don't have to be fights, but they have to be things that people can say, there is a battle. I know I am a part of the party.
2 weeks ago today, Prime Minister Harper signed the largest trade promotion agreement, the largest free trade agreement in our economic history, giving us virtually tariff-free access to a market of 500 million people. This is the most ambitious and biggest trade agreement, I think, in economic history. I think that's a pretty significant issue. If you remember, dial the clock back 20 years ago, the idea merely of more trade with the United States was considered existential. So this is a government that is focused on big things. You could relook at our throne speech, major continued commitments on the criminal justice agenda, on immigration reform. I mean, that's a big and daring, bold initiative of this government to fix what was a broken asylum system. We're getting stats right now showing that there will be less than 10,000 asylum claims in Canada this year. There used to be 40,000 because of our dramatic reforms. These are big, substantive, consequential reforms that we're making, but for some reason, because they're dealing with substantive policy rather than who said, she said in the Senate, they don't generate much media coverage.
You know what, I looked at that Canada-Europe free trade deal. I understand it's worth $12 billion a year. Well, the Northern Gateway Pipeline to BC would be worth $18 billion a year. The Eastern Pipeline to New Brunswick would be worth even more. Those are stalled, and just today, or yesterday, the National Energy Board, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, came out with a very negative report on the proposed New Prosperity Mine in BC. The central economic strength of our country is still gummed up in our boards and regulatory systems. Those pipelines are no closer to reality today than they were 5 years ago.
Well, as you know, to be fair, Ezra, our government was massively criticized by the opposition parties, many in the media, and a lot of interest groups for having brought through legislation to significantly streamline and speed up the regulatory process. Yes, of course, we all want to make sure that we maintain the highest possible environmental standards. We don't compromise on that. But the regulatory decisions should be made in a reasonable amount of time. That's what our new law says, and we were widely criticized for that. So I think you are seeing progress on these matters. No government could possibly have more strongly advocated for access for Canadian oil to the U.S. through the Keystone XL pipeline, for example. We're advocating and moving forward on the West-East oil pipeline, and we're trying to support greater market access to the West Coast. We're doing what's necessary, but of course we do need to maintain a quality regulatory process that doesn't get bogged down forever.
I've got one more question for you, and it is related. I'm talking about the riots in Rexton, New Brunswick. The RCMP, I thought, had a very measured, it was actually a miracle that they shut down that riot without major injury. I mean, that's shocking to me that happened, such an operational success. But we see that the Micmac warriors are digging in, threatening more violence, Indian chiefs across the country going to New Brunswick, whipping them up, saying, we support what you did. And we see calls for more radical Aboriginal uprisings. Clayton Thomas Mueller, who takes U.S. funding through the Indigenous Environmental Network, he's threatening to turn Idle No More into really a paramilitary uprising, and this is fused with the environmental groups. I don't think that the Premier of New Brunswick, who's a good egg, but he's just the Premier of a fairly small province, I don't know if he has the resources and the strength to take on a national challenge that's violent like that. What do you have to say?
Well, the government of New Brunswick is responsible for the enforcement of criminal law, and they do so through an arrangement with the RCMP. They apply federal law with the federal police force, but under their constitutional jurisdiction. Obviously, we support the rule of law. At the same time, I don't think I don't think we should give to the radicals and extremists the kind of feedback they're looking for. They want confrontation everywhere, all the time, and I think we have to be smart in how we deal with them. Yes, we have to ensure there's the rule of law and responsible resource development, but we shouldn't get into a kind of heated rhetorical fight with groups who really are marginal.
All right, Jason Kenney, great to talk with you. Thanks for taking the time. Cheers.